He thought he had it all planned. Lucas Whitmore, a man used to controlling everything, had drafted the divorce papers himself. He wanted it done fast, before anyone could stop him. He wanted to lock her out of the house, her bank accounts, even her phone. He thought he was clever. He thought he held all the cards. He was wrong. Clara Whitmore sat across from him, quiet, composed, but her eyes were stormy. She didn't reach for the papers. She didn't panic. She just watched him. Every word he said felt like a knife being sharpened. "Clara," he said, his voice smooth, controlled. "The papers are ready. Sign and we move on. It's over." Respectfully. Respectfully? She tried not to laugh, though her lips trembled. Respectfully? That was what he called shoving a lifetime of their life together into a $50,000 check. A sum that wouldn't even cover a year in the apartment she had called home. A sum that wouldn't even cover her therapy for the weeks of stress he had caused. "Respectfully?" she asked softly. Her voice was quiet, almost fragile, but it carried a weight that made him pause. Lucas leaned back in his chair, glancing at the documents. He didn't see the storm building across the table. He didn't see that Clara wasn't the same woman he had married 5 years ago. She had changed. She had learned. And she had a weapon he didn't even know existed. He wanted her to be scared. He wanted her to beg. But she just waited. Arthur Kane, Lucas's lawyer, hovered like a hawk. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, and a mind trained to destroy anyone who dared cross Lucas. Section 7. Arthur said, sliding the papers forward, "Lifestyle incompatibility, $50,000. Sign here, Mrs. Whitmore." He smiled a small, cruel smile. He thought it would intimidate her. It didn't. Clara's gaze didn't falter. "Section 7, she said, almost like a whisper. "That's the one you thought would make me vanish, isn't it?" Lucas frowned, leaning forward. "What are you talking about?" he asked. His voice had just a hint of doubt. That tiny crack in his control, he hated it. "You rushed this divorce," Clara said, her tone steady, "because you wanted to lock me out. But did you ever stop to think? I might be holding the evidence." Evidence. The word hung in the air like a live wire. Lucas laughed, a short, sharp laugh. "Evidence? You? Don't make me laugh." He tapped the papers. "These are all the rules. I followed the law. I did this by the book. You have nothing, Clara. Nothing at all." She didn't move. She just reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn notebook. Lucas raised an eyebrow. "What's that?" he asked. She didn't answer. She opened it, revealing pages filled with dates, emails, doctor's notes, screenshots, and a medical log he had ignored. Every day, every warning he had brushed aside was written down. Every demand she had made, and every time he had refused was recorded. Lucas's smirk faltered. "That's just paperwork," he stammered. But she smiled, cold and sharp. "Paperwork," she said. "This is the proof. You prioritized your deals, your stock options, your reputation, over my health, over my life. For 6 months, I begged you to move me to cleaner air. I begged you to care. You ignored me. You were so busy making money. You forgot the person you promised to protect." Arthur Kane's jaw dropped. Lucas sat frozen, staring at the notebook like it was a snake ready to strike. "What is this?" he asked, voice cracking slightly. Clara didn't answer. She just let the silence fill the room. Every second that ticked by made him smaller, made her stronger. Every second reminded him that he wasn't in control anymore. She turned to Arthur. "Read section 12, paragraph B," she said. Arthur flipped through the documents, muttering, "Fidelity, corporate adultery?" He paused, eyes widening. It says," his voice trailed. Lucas's face went pale. "What do you mean, corporate adultery?" he demanded. Clara's voice was quiet but deadly. "You call your business a priority, Lucas. You spent 182 days ignoring my health for your deals. That's what the contract calls corporate adultery. You cheated on me with your work. And now, the prenuptial agreement is void. We default to New York law." Lucas blinked. He couldn't process it. He was a genius in the boardroom. A man who could predict markets, buy companies, manipulate lawyers, and charm investors. And yet here he was, powerless, trapped by the very contract he thought he controlled. She held the proof. She had waited, patient, silent, while he made every mistake, every oversight, every arrogant assumption. She closed the notebook slowly, deliberately. Half of everything, Lucas. Half of Omnicore. Half of everything you built on the back of what my father created. His hand shook slightly. Arthur Kane's face was a mask of disbelief. Lucas couldn't speak. He wanted to shout, to call security, to grab the papers and tear them up, but he couldn't. She had him exactly where she wanted him. Clara's eyes softened for a fraction of a second. I didn't do this for the money, she said quietly. I did it for the truth. For the man my father trusted me to protect. You think this is about revenge? It's not. It's about justice. Lucas felt a rage he had never known. He had faced competitors, lawsuits, hostile takeovers, and market crashes. None of it compared to this. This was personal. This was public. And he couldn't fight it with money, with lawyers, with power. Not this time. And Clara? She stood, picked up the divorce papers, and tore them in half. Just like that. A loud rip echoed in the room, like a gunshot. $2 billion worth of contracts and secrets, meaningless to her now. She didn't want the penthouse. She didn't want the cars. She didn't even want the ring he had bought her. She wanted her life back. And nothing he could say or do would stop her. Lucas tried to speak, but words failed him. He looked at Clara, this woman he had underestimated for 5 years, and realized he had been playing a game he didn't even understand. She had been 3 moves ahead the whole time. And now, she was free. Arthur Kane's phone buzzed. He was trying to salvage something, anything, but it was too late. Clara had the evidence. She had the law. And she had her mind. Every step she had taken over the past months had been carefully calculated, every document saved, every email screenshot stored. She was untouchable. Clara's final words echoed in the room, quiet but fierce. Don't underestimate me, Lucas. Not again. And never forget, the truth always finds a way. The storm outside the penthouse windows seemed to answer her. Wind howled. Rain streaked the glass. The city lights flickered. And Lucas Whitmore sat there, defeated, realizing that power isn't just money. Power is information. And she had all of it. The next morning, Lucas woke up with a pounding headache. He thought maybe he could fix it all with a calm meeting, some charm, a quick signature, and everything would be back under control. But Clara had already beaten him at his own game. She had gone to the court early, filing motions he didn't even know existed, motions that could freeze accounts, revoke privileges, and expose everything he thought hidden. He stared at the ceiling of his penthouse, his mind racing. Every corner of his empire now felt fragile, shaky, like a glass tower ready to collapse. He thought he had built his life on unshakable ground, but he had forgotten the foundation, Clara. She had been there the whole time, silent, observing, recording, learning, and he hadn't noticed. Clara, meanwhile, walked into her lawyer's office with quiet confidence. She didn't yell. She didn't plead. She didn't even panic. She handed over her notebook and a USB filled with emails, texts, and recordings. Her lawyer looked at her, eyes wide. You have everything? He asked. She nodded. Everything. He thought rushing the divorce would make me powerless. He thought he controlled the evidence. He doesn't even know what control means anymore. Lucas, at his office, tried to make a call to Arthur Kane. He wanted an update, a plan, anything that could save him from the avalanche he had triggered. The line rang, then went silent. Messages went unanswered. Even his top assistants were hesitant. Rumors were already starting to spread. Clara's legal move was elegant, precise, and terrifyingly effective. He stormed into the boardroom, slamming his fists on the table. His team looked at him nervously. Where's the plan? Why aren't we doing anything? He demanded. No one answered immediately, because no one knew what to do. Lucas had always been the storm, the one who made things happen, the one people feared. Now he was powerless. Meanwhile, Clara was calm. She moved methodically, step by step. Each document she filed, each piece of evidence she presented, tightened the net around Lucas. She wasn't just defending herself. She was setting a record straight, showing the world, and herself, that she wasn't someone to be toyed with. Every detail mattered. Every date, every screenshot, every email she had saved could dismantle him entirely. At the courthouse, reporters began to notice. They smelled a story, a scandal bigger than anything Lucas had faced in the business world. Cameras flashed as Clara entered, composed and calm. Lucas followed, fuming, trying to look untouchable, but the media could see through the cracks in his armor. His confidence was gone, replaced by panic masked as anger. Inside the courtroom, the tension was electric. Lucas tried to speak, to dominate the conversation, to make it all about him. "This is absurd," he shouted. "These papers are false. This evidence is fabricated." But Clara's attorney presented it with calm authority. "Every email, every note, every log is verified," he said. "These records are factual. Ms. Whitmore has followed the law and preserved every detail of her case." Lucas's face turned red. His voice rose, trembling with frustration. The judge looked over his glasses, unimpressed. "Mr. Whitmore, you may have financial power, but the court only recognizes evidence," the judge said. "And evidence has been provided." Every word was a strike. Every moment Clara's calm authority contrasted with Lucas's desperation. He had been the storm in her life, and now the storm had turned inward, hitting him where it hurt most. His control, his dominance, his arrogance, they all crumbled under the weight of her preparation. Clara didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She had already won the psychological battle. The court proceedings were a formality now, a place where her preparation could shine. Lucas couldn't hide. He couldn't charm. He couldn't intimidate. She had taken away all the tools he had relied on for years. Her strategy was simple but powerful. She knew every trick he had ever used, his threats, his charm, his manipulations. She knew how he operated, and she used it against him without mercy. Every motion filed, every piece of evidence presented, was designed to show the truth, that Lucas Whitmore had acted recklessly, arrogantly, and selfishly. Outside the courtroom, whispers spread fast. Lawyers, reporters, and even some of Lucas's allies began to doubt him. The empire he had built seemed fragile in the light of Clara's meticulous preparation. And while Lucas had spent decades thinking he could control everything with money and power, Clara proved that knowledge and patience could dismantle even the most formidable fortress. Inside the courtroom, Clara's voice was steady. "I did not come here to destroy him," she said quietly. "I came here to protect myself, to protect my life, to protect the truth." Every word landed like a hammer. Lucas flinched with every sentence, realizing the woman he had tried to intimidate was untouchable now. The media captured every moment. The headlines began to spread like wildfire. "Whitmore divorce. Wife holds the evidence, and power and pride collide in Whitmore case." Social media erupted. Every clip of Clara standing calmly while Lucas raged became viral. People saw her strength, her intelligence, her courage. They saw a woman who refused to be silenced. Lucas tried to salvage his reputation with a few carefully crafted statements, but they sounded hollow. He was no longer in control of the narrative. Clara's evidence and composure made him look small, desperate, and reckless. And the more he fought to regain control, the more the world saw the cracks in his empire. By the end of the day, Clara had achieved something he never expected. She didn't just survive the attack. She thrived under pressure. She turned his arrogance into his downfall. And as she walked out of the courthouse, rain falling gently on her face, she felt a freedom she hadn't felt in years. Lucas, watching from the other side of town, realized that his rush, his arrogance, and his need to control everything had been his undoing. He had underestimated her, ignored her, and tried to silence her. And now, For the first time in his life, he faced the consequences of his hubris. In the quiet of her apartment later that night, Clara opened her notebook once more. She smiled faintly, thinking about the months of preparation, the careful steps, the patience. She had taken the storm, faced it, and come out stronger. And while the fight wasn't completely over, she knew one thing for certain: no one would ever underestimate her again. The first step had been taken, and the storm that Lucas thought he could control had turned into her victory. The next morning, Lucas woke up in a cold sweat. The night had been restless. He kept replaying Clara's calm, confident face in his mind. How could she have anticipated everything? How could she have turned all his power against him without even raising her voice? Every plan he had relied on for years seemed to crumble in an instant. And the more he thought about it, the angrier he got. He slammed his hand against the marble counter of his kitchen. How did she get all this? He muttered to himself. He had always been careful, always planned 10 steps ahead. But Clara had outsmarted him in a way he hadn't expected. She hadn't just prepared. She had studied him, his habits, his weaknesses, and exploited them like a master. And now, he was left chasing shadows, desperately trying to regain control. Meanwhile, Clara moved through her day like a quiet storm. She wasn't loud, she wasn't flashy, but every action she took carried weight. Every email she sent, every call she made, and every document she prepared was another piece of the fortress she was building around her future. Her calm demeanor confused some people. They couldn't understand how someone who had been cornered, humiliated, and threatened could remain so collected. But Clara knew the power of preparation, patience, and timing. Lucas tried to reach his top advisors, hoping someone could give him a solution. He demanded updates, legal strategies, damage control measures. But the truth was, there was no simple solution. Every move he made was anticipated. Every action had been countered. Even his trusted assistants looked at him with worry and a hint of fear. The man who had ruled his business empire with confidence and authority was suddenly vulnerable, exposed, and desperate. At the courthouse, Clara's team continued to present evidence, carefully, step by step. Each piece told a story. Emails that showed attempts to manipulate and control, messages that revealed threats, logs that documented financial missteps. All were laid out clearly, leaving little room for argument. Every time Lucas tried to interrupt, the judge and the attorneys handled it with precision, keeping the focus on the evidence. Lucas's anger grew, but so did his frustration. He realized that shouting and threatening no longer worked. He had relied on fear and intimidation for so long that the idea of being powerless was almost unbearable. And yet, that was exactly where he found himself, helpless, exposed, and watched by the world. Outside the courtroom, whispers and murmurs began to spread. Reporters who had once ignored Clara now took notice. Social media accounts started to buzz with clips of her composure, her determination, and the undeniable evidence she had presented. People started sympathizing with her, seeing a woman standing strong against a man who thought money and power could buy silence and submission. Lucas's team tried to spin the story, releasing carefully crafted statements to the media. But the words sounded hollow, weak, and defensive. The public could see through the facade. Clara's calm, confident approach contrasted sharply with Lucas's desperation and rage. Every statement he made seemed to dig him deeper into a hole he couldn't climb out of. Inside the courtroom, Clara remained focused. She knew that victory wasn't just about legal arguments. It was about showing strength, resilience, and intelligence. Her every action, every word, and every pause was calculated to maintain control and keep the upper hand. And Lucas, who had always relied on dominance and aggression, couldn't keep up. He was fighting a battle he didn't understand, against a woman who had prepared for every possibility. Clara's lawyer called witnesses, each one confirming the details of her story. Every testimony reinforced the evidence she had collected. And with each confirmation, Lucas's confidence crumbled further. He had underestimated her ability to plan, to observe, and to execute. And now, he was paying the price. Lucas tried to take control of the courtroom, shouting and interrupting, but it only made him look worse. The judge maintained order, and every interruption highlighted his lack of preparation and composure. Clara, on the other hand, remained calm, letting the evidence speak for itself. She didn't need to shout or demand attention. Her strength came from preparation, patience, and intelligence. By the end of the day, Lucas felt the weight of reality pressing down on him. His empire, his pride, and his carefully built image were all threatened. He had rushed the divorce, thinking speed and force would give him the upper hand. But he hadn't counted on Clara's patience, foresight, and ability to turn the game around. Back at her apartment, Clara reviewed her notes once more. She wasn't done yet, but she could feel the momentum shifting in her favor. She had taken the first major step in reclaiming her life and ensuring justice. Every move she made was deliberate, every action designed to strengthen her position. And while the battle wasn't over, she could finally see a path to victory. Lucas, meanwhile, paced his office, realizing that every strategy he had relied on for years was useless. The man who had always controlled every situation was now controlled by circumstance. The divorce he had rushed to gain advantage had backfired spectacularly. Every attempt to regain control only revealed his desperation further. As night fell, Clara sat quietly, reflecting on the day's events. She had faced intimidation, threats, and the overwhelming power of her husband. Yet, she had emerged stronger, calmer, and more in control than ever. And while the court still had proceedings to go, she knew she had already won a critical psychological battle. Lucas, lying awake in his penthouse, realized the truth. He had underestimated Clara at every turn. He had assumed that speed, money, and intimidation could overpower patience, intelligence, and meticulous planning. And now, he was paying the ultimate price for that arrogance. The following morning, Clara woke with a renewed sense of purpose. She had proven to herself and to the world that no one could manipulate or control her. Every piece of evidence she had carefully preserved was a testament to her strength, foresight, and determination. And as she prepared for the next steps in court, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: empowerment. Lucas, by contrast, faced a growing sense of dread. Every headline, every social media post, every legal move by Clara chipped away at his confidence and control. He had rushed into a battle he didn't understand, and now he had to live with the consequences of underestimating the one person he should have never underestimated: Clara. The tide had turned, and while the courtroom still held many battles, one thing was clear: Clara had taken the storm and used it to her advantage. She had transformed fear into strength, doubt into confidence, and helplessness into control. Lucas, once the master of manipulation, now found himself outmaneuvered at every turn, learning the hard way that underestimating someone capable, patient, and smart was a mistake that could never be undone. The next day, the courtroom was filled with tension so thick it felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Lucas walked in, confident as always, trying to mask the unease gnawing at him. Every step he took seemed calculated to show authority, but the moment he saw Clara seated calmly at the plaintiff's table, a cold chill ran down his spine. He knew, deep inside, that this wasn't going to be easy. He had rushed the divorce, thinking that speed would lock her out, thinking that he could corner her. He had been so sure that the court would side with him, but that certainty was cracking. Clara didn't flinch. She sat upright, her hands resting lightly on her briefcase. She wasn't shouting, she wasn't pacing, but there was a quiet fire in her eyes that cut through the noise. She had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her head, imagining every question, every counter, every trap he might try to lay for her. And now that the moment had arrived, she was ready. Lucas tried to start with his usual tactics. He attempted to interrupt, tried to belittle witnesses, and even threw in a few aggressive gestures toward the judge. But the judge remained calm and composed, allowing nothing to break the flow of Clara's case. Each interruption from Lucas only drew more attention to his lack of preparation. The courtroom's attention shifted. The whispers grew louder, the tension tighter. Lucas could feel the eyes of everyone in the room judging him, silently acknowledging that the power dynamic had shifted. Clara's lawyer began presenting more evidence, piece by piece. Each document, each email, each financial record told a story that painted Lucas not as a victim, but as someone trying to manipulate the system to his advantage. Every attempt he had made to rush the divorce had left traces, and Clara had collected them all. She had anticipated his every move, and every action he had taken now worked against him. Lucas's face turned red with frustration. His voice rose, but it sounded hollow, like a shadow of authority that no longer held any weight. Every time he tried to argue, Clara's calm responses dismantled him without even needing to raise her voice. She didn't need theatrics. Her evidence and composure were far more powerful than his aggression. Outside the courtroom, the tension was palpable. Reporters who had been skeptical of Clara now began noticing her composure. Clips of her calm demeanor and precise arguments circulated on social media, quickly gaining traction. People began to root for her, fascinated by her ability to turn a situation that seemed overwhelmingly in Lucas's favor into one where she held the advantage. They could see the truth clearly. The man who had tried to control everything was now exposed, while the woman he had tried to humiliate had become the center of attention, the one everyone admired for her strength. Lucas's team frantically tried to adjust. They whispered strategies, handed him notes, and reminded him to control his tone. But the harder he tried to dominate, the more obvious it became that he was losing ground. His desperation was a stark contrast to Clara's quiet strength. She didn't need anyone to tell her what to do. She knew. Every move he made, she anticipated. Every strategy he devised, she had already planned a counter for. One by one, witnesses stepped forward. Each testimony reinforced the careful preparation Clara had done. They spoke of manipulations, controlling behaviors, and attempts to rush legal proceedings without proper transparency. Lucas tried to object, tried to sway the narrative, but it was too late. The witnesses were clear, consistent, and factual. They confirmed what Clara had predicted all along. Rushing the divorce hadn't given him control. It had given her evidence, leverage, and the upper hand. Lucas's frustration boiled over. He slammed his hands on the table, tried to shout over the proceedings, and even leaned threateningly toward a witness, hoping to intimidate. But nothing worked. The courtroom wasn't just following the rules, it was following Clara's lead. She was calm, precise, and relentless. Her eyes never wavered from him, silently warning that any attempt at manipulation would be seen, remembered, and countered. At one point, Lucas realized something terrifying. Every move he made, every insult, every gesture of anger was being recorded, not just by the court, but by cameras, by his own team, and by Clara's careful preparation. He had underestimated her ability to turn his aggression into evidence against him. Every time he tried to assert dominance, it only strengthened her position. The man who thought power and wealth could control everything was learning, too late, that patience, foresight, and courage were far more powerful weapons. Clara's calmness wasn't just strategic, it was deeply human. She had suffered, she had been humiliated, but she hadn't let it break her. Her ability to stay composed, even when faced with threats, wasn't just legal savvy. It was emotional intelligence, strength, and resilience all rolled into one. And Lucas, who had tried to overwhelm her with speed and aggression, could see it now. He could see that his tactics were ineffective against someone who had mastered both mind and heart. As the day dragged on, Lucas began to realize the depth of his mistake. He had rushed, he had assumed, he had believed that control came from being first, being loud, being intimidating. But in reality, control came from preparation, calmness, and strategy. Clara had all of these, and he had none. His anger had blinded him, his assumptions had trapped him, and his desperation had exposed him. The crowd in the courtroom could sense the shift. Lucas, once the center of attention, now seemed desperate and exposed. Clara, the woman he had underestimated, had quietly claimed the spotlight. Every nod from the judge, every acknowledgement from a witness, and every moment of silence after a point was made reinforced the idea that she was winning, not just legally, but morally and emotionally. By the end of the day, Lucas was exhausted, frustrated, and broken. His attempts to dominate had failed, his strategies had backfired, and his confidence was shattered. Clara, on the other hand, was composed, focused, and quietly triumphant. She had faced fear, intimidation, and manipulation, and had emerged stronger than ever. That evening, as Lucas returned to his penthouse, he stared at the city skyline, trying to figure out where it had all gone wrong. Every plan he had, every shortcut he had tried to take, every attempt to control the situation had been anticipated, countered, and turned against him. And as the weight of reality sank in, he realized a bitter truth. Rushing the divorce had not given him control. It had given Clara the evidence, the leverage, and the power he thought he had taken from her. Meanwhile, Clara sat quietly in her apartment, reviewing her notes and reflecting on the day. She wasn't done yet. There were still steps to take, battles to fight, and strategy to refine. But she felt a quiet confidence, a sense of control that came from knowing she had turned the storm to her advantage. Every action Lucas had taken to intimidate or rush her had only strengthened her case. And as she prepared for the next day, she knew the tide had shifted decisively in her favor. Lucas, meanwhile, faced the crushing realization that he had underestimated her at every turn. He had assumed that speed, money, and intimidation could overpower her patience, intelligence, and meticulous planning. And now, he was living with the consequences of that arrogance. The divorce he had rushed to lock her out had backfired spectacularly. Every move he made now was watched, anticipated, and countered. And so, the battle continued, but the lines had clearly been drawn. Clara had turned fear into strength, doubt into confidence, and desperation into strategy. Lucas, once a master of control, now found himself outmaneuvered at every turn, learning the hard way that underestimating someone capable, prepared, and determined was a mistake that could not be undone. The next morning, the courtroom buzzed with whispers. Every person present seemed to sense the shift that had occurred the day before. Lucas arrived with his usual air of arrogance, but it was thinner now, cracked at the edges by sleepless nights and mounting pressure. Clara, as always, entered quietly, calm and poised. She didn't need to make an entrance. Her presence alone commanded attention, and every whisper in the room seemed to lean toward her favor. Lucas tried to regain control immediately. He spoke louder, gestured more aggressively, and attempted to intimidate witnesses who were scheduled to testify that day. But Clara had anticipated this. She had meticulously prepared for each possible move he could make. Every question that might trip her up had been rehearsed. Every angle that might seem weak had been fortified with evidence. The first witness was a close friend of Lucas, someone he had expected to provide testimony in his favor. But when asked questions about the rushed divorce, the witness faltered. Memories that had been vague in casual conversation became sharp under the scrutiny of Clara's lawyer. Emails, messages, and documents that Lucas hadn't considered were presented, quietly but powerfully. The witness realized mid-testimony that they couldn't lie or manipulate the story without exposing themselves. Lucas's confidence wavered. His plan to intimidate the witness was failing. Clara's calm and collected approach stood in stark contrast to Lucas's mounting frustration. Every point she made, Every piece of evidence she presented chipped away at his aggressive facade. The courtroom watched in silent awe as a woman who had been underestimated for so long dismantled the narrative of a man who had believed speed and power would win the day. Lucas tried to shift tactics. He began to attack Clara directly, questioning her credibility, attempting to twist small inconsistencies into evidence against her. But every accusation he threw only served to highlight his desperation. Clara's responses were precise, factual, and unwavering. She didn't need to shout or show anger. The truth itself was her weapon. Each calm word, each steady explanation, made Lucas appear irrational, impulsive, and weak. Outside, reporters and social media began capturing the story. Clips of Lucas's aggressive behavior and Clara's composed responses spread quickly. People started recognizing a theme. The man who thought he could rush and control everything was being outmaneuvered by the woman he had tried to humiliate. Viewers felt drawn to Clara's strength, rooting for her not just because of the legal battle, but because they could see her courage and intelligence. As the day progressed, Lucas realized something terrifying. The very tactics he had relied on, speed, intimidation, and aggression, were now the tools Clara used against him. Every document he had tried to hide, every shortcut he had taken to manipulate the divorce, had been collected and cataloged by her. Each attempt to corner her now became evidence of his own misjudgment. His frustration was visible to all, but Clara remained serene, even empathetic in her demeanor, further highlighting the contrast between them. One particularly dramatic moment occurred when Lucas tried to present a new piece of evidence, hoping to surprise Clara. But she had anticipated it. She held up a document, a copy he hadn't realized she already had, that contradicted his claims. The courtroom gasped quietly as it became clear that she had prepared for this, just as she had prepared for everything else. Lucas's face reddened with anger and embarrassment. He realized, painfully, that he was not just losing the battle, he had never truly had the upper hand. Witness after witness reinforced Clara's story. Each one, speaking calmly and truthfully, chipped away at Lucas's carefully constructed narrative. The more he tried to interrupt or assert authority, the more the court noticed his agitation. His aggression now served as evidence of his manipulation and lack of preparation. The very tactics he had believed would intimidate Clara and the court had backfired, making him appear reckless and controlling. Clara's strategy was not just about proving her case. It was about controlling the narrative. She knew that public perception mattered as much as legal outcomes. Each moment in court was a carefully calculated opportunity to show patience, intelligence, and moral strength. And as Lucas grew more desperate, she remained calm, allowing the truth and her preparation to shine brighter with each passing minute. Lucas's team tried to salvage the situation, whispering strategies, providing notes, and reminding him to stay composed. But the harder he tried to control the narrative, the more obvious it became that he was outmatched. Clara had turned his own aggression into a disadvantage. Every shout, every harsh gesture, every attempt to dominate only emphasized the contrast between his desperation and her controlled strength. By the afternoon, Lucas was visibly exhausted. His usual confidence had been replaced with panic, frustration, and a creeping sense of defeat. Clara, on the other hand, remained composed, strategically presenting evidence and letting the witnesses speak for themselves. Her quiet strength captivated the courtroom, turning attention and sympathy in her favor. People watching from outside could see clearly who held the moral and strategic high ground. Lucas made one last attempt to regain control. He leaned toward the judge, whispered something, and tried to regain the court's favor. But it was too late. The day had shown clearly who was prepared and who was not. Every mistake he had made rushing the divorce was now visible. Every attempt to intimidate Clara had failed, and every miscalculation had strengthened her case. Clara's calmness was her secret weapon. It wasn't just about staying collected. It was about understanding the situation, anticipating every move, and letting her evidence speak louder than words. Lucas had assumed power came from being loud, fast, and aggressive. Clara proved that true power comes from patience, preparation, and quiet confidence. As the court adjourned for the day, the whispers in the room made it clear that the tide had turned. Lucas, who had thought he could control the outcome with speed and intimidation, now faced the reality that he was outmaneuvered. Clara had taken what seemed like weakness, her calm, composed demeanor, and transformed it into a weapon more powerful than any attack he could throw. Outside the courtroom, the media frenzy continued. The story of the woman who had turned a rushed, manipulative divorce into a strategic victory spread across social media. People admired Clara's intelligence, her patience, and her emotional strength. Lucas's attempts to dominate and control the situation only highlighted his arrogance and desperation. That night, as Lucas sat alone in his office, he finally understood the full weight of his mistakes. Rushing the divorce had not given him power. It had given Clara control, leverage, and undeniable evidence. Every move he had made to humiliate her and assert dominance had been anticipated, countered, and recorded. And now, he was paying the price of underestimating her. Meanwhile, Clara quietly reviewed the day's proceedings, noting her successes and areas for further preparation. She knew the battle wasn't over, but she also knew that she had established a decisive advantage. Every piece of evidence she had prepared, every calm response she had given, and every strategic decision she had made had put her in a position of strength. She wasn't just fighting for a divorce. She was reclaiming control, respect, and dignity. Lucas, on the other hand, faced sleepless nights filled with anxiety. He had believed that rushing and intimidation could secure victory, but he had learned, painfully, that underestimating someone who was prepared and determined was a mistake with consequences far beyond what he had imagined. And so, the story continued. Clara had taken control of the narrative, turned fear into strategy, and proven that calm preparation could defeat aggression. Lucas, once confident and in control, now faced the realization that his actions had backfired, and that the woman he had tried to humiliate had emerged stronger, smarter, and more powerful than ever. The final day of the hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed, the air tense with anticipation. Reporters, family, and strangers alike waited to see the conclusion of what had already become a story of intelligence versus arrogance, calm versus aggression. Lucas entered first, his usual swagger replaced by a tight, forced smile. He had tried everything: rushed filings, intimidation, last-minute evidence, but it had all been anticipated. Every attempt to control the narrative had failed. Clara walked in with quiet confidence. She didn't need to announce herself. Her reputation had already preceded her. She took her seat calmly, reviewing her notes, her expression composed. There was a quiet power in her presence that made people lean in, silently rooting for her. The contrast between her calm and Lucas's tense posture was palpable. Every observer, from the judge to the spectators, could feel it. The first witness was called. This was someone who had previously been hesitant, unsure how to testify. But now, backed by Clara's thorough preparation, they spoke with clarity, honesty, and confidence. Each word reinforced Clara's story, that Lucas had rushed the divorce not to protect himself or the law, but to control and humiliate her. Each revelation was like a hammer striking the fragile foundation Lucas had built so quickly. Lucas tried to intervene, attempting to shout over the witness or challenge the evidence. But it was too late. The courtroom had already noticed his desperation. His interruptions only highlighted his lack of preparation and his impulsive, aggressive behavior. The more he tried to dominate, the more the evidence of his misjudgment became obvious. Clara's lawyer stood and presented the final pieces of evidence: emails, recorded conversations, financial documents, and even witness statements that contradicted Lucas's rushed claims. Each piece was a nail in the coffin of his arrogance. Clara didn't need to shout, gesture, or dramatize. The facts themselves spoke louder than any words could. Her strategy was simple but devastatingly effective. Stay calm, be prepared, and let the truth do the talking. The judge asked for closing statements. Lucas fumbled, trying to sound authoritative while masking his panic. His words were defensive, scattered, lacking the conviction he had assumed would intimidate Clara or sway the court. Every sentence he spoke only underscored the mistakes he had made in rushing the divorce, the shortcuts he had taken, and the evidence he had failed to anticipate Clara would have. Clara rose, her calm demeanor commanding attention. She didn't just repeat the facts. She told the story, her story. She spoke of patience, planning, and the quiet strength it took to face someone who underestimated her. She didn't attack Lucas personally. She let his own actions illustrate his mistakes. Her voice was steady, confident, and emotionally charged, and with each word, the courtroom leaned closer, captivated by her honesty and courage. When she finished, the room was silent. No one needed to say anything. The impact of her words and the weight of the evidence were unmistakable. Even those who had initially assumed Lucas's victory now realized the truth. Rushing, aggression, and intimidation could never overpower preparation, strategy, and composure. The judge reviewed the final documents, taking time to consider the evidence presented. Lucas's face showed strain, worry lines deepening with every passing second. Clara sat quietly, her calmness unwavering, her eyes fixed on the proceedings. She had turned the entire situation to her advantage. The man who had tried to control and humiliate her had, in fact, been controlled by her preparation and foresight. Finally, the judge spoke. Every word echoed through the courtroom, carrying the weight of justice and reason. The decision favored Clara. She had won, not just because she had the evidence, but because she had anticipated every move, remained composed under pressure, and allowed truth and patience to guide her. The courtroom erupted quietly with murmurs of approval, some relief, and admiration for her strategy and courage. Lucas's reaction was a mixture of disbelief, frustration, and shame. He had rushed, assumed power, and tried to dominate, but he had been outmaneuvered at every step. The same speed and aggression that he had counted on had become his undoing. Every shortcut, every attempt to humiliate her, had been anticipated and countered. The reality was undeniable. Clara had controlled the entire narrative, turning his arrogance into her advantage. Outside the courtroom, the media captured the final moments. Social media buzzed with admiration for Clara's intelligence, patience, and emotional strength. The story was no longer just about a divorce. It had become a tale of justice, strategy, and resilience. People were captivated by the woman who had faced humiliation, pressure, and manipulation, and emerged victorious. Clara walked out of the courthouse calmly, acknowledging the few friends and supporters waiting outside. She didn't need to celebrate loudly. Her victory was evident in every glance, every acknowledgement of her composure, and every sign of respect from those who had witnessed the proceedings. Lucas followed, subdued and defeated, a stark contrast to the man who had entered with confidence and aggression. That evening, as Clara reflected on the day, she realized the true lesson extended beyond the courtroom. Rushing, intimidation, and aggression might appear to give temporary power, but patience, strategy, and calm intelligence always hold the ultimate advantage. She had not only protected herself legally, but had also reclaimed her dignity, control, and confidence. Lucas, in contrast, faced sleepless nights filled with regret. He had underestimated Clara at every turn, assuming that speed and force could secure victory. But the reality was that control, foresight, and emotional intelligence had proven far stronger than aggression. Every mistake he had made in trying to rush the divorce was now painfully obvious, and the consequences of underestimating her would stay with him for a long time. As the days passed, Clara's story became an example for others, a story of strength, strategy, and courage. People admired her not just for winning a legal battle, but for how she had done it, with patience, calm, and intelligence. She had turned what could have been a story of defeat into a story of empowerment. And in that moment, Clara understood something more profound. Victory wasn't just about the outcome in the courtroom. It was about proving that strength lies not in aggression or speed, but in preparation, resilience, and unwavering composure. She had faced someone who tried to control her, humiliate her, and rush her, and she had come out stronger, smarter, and in control. Lucas, meanwhile, had learned the harsh lesson that true control is never achieved by rushing, shouting, or trying to dominate. It is earned through foresight, preparation, and the ability to remain composed in the face of challenges. The man who had thought he could lock her out and humiliate her now faced the reality that he had been outsmarted at every turn. The story ended not with loud celebrations or dramatic confrontations, but with quiet triumph. Clara had proven that calm, preparation, and intelligence could overcome aggression and manipulation. She walked away with dignity intact, a clear victory, and a lesson that would resonate far beyond the walls of the courtroom.